All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Lisa Macumber. I'm the Chief of the Equitable Mobility Incentives Branch at CARB. You'll see me here and there throughout the day, but you won't have to listen to me all day. We do have a new MC today. So in a little bit, I'll be handing things over to Michaela Eldu, who will be guiding you through our very full agenda. We are really excited. This is our third symposium for lessons learned in transportation light duty equity. And the first two were just very new for us to kind of get conversations going. And that's, I think, the most important thing about this year too is really to keep the conversation going. We want this to be a comfortable space for folks to share lessons through implementing your projects or for participating in your projects, in working with us as state agencies or our other partners. It's an opportunity to really share your insight and talk through the different things that we can do to make our programs better and really reach the equity communities that we are focused on reaching. So please keep that in mind. This is not meant to be a formal conference. This is really an informal opportunity. You get to know one another. Please take advantage of the networking opportunities, our larger breaks, to go talk to somebody you've never met before and start to build those connections so that as we have our next year Symposium 2, you'll have a lot more friendly faces when you walk in the room. All right, and with that, a few housekeeping items. So for those of you in this room, restrooms are right across the hall when you step out. This is our main ballroom. Our main panels will be in here today. We do have a number of breakout sessions that take place in various rooms along this corridor. One of them is located in the mezzanine area, the San Diego room, which is way down the far left to get to that room. As well as in case there's any emergency, you all know where the stairs are, so you head straight to the stairs and head down. We do have interpretation services today as well, so if you are in the room and you are in need of interpretation services, please head to the back and connect yourself with Arvin. Arvin's got his hand up at the back. Just connect with him and he'll set you up. And for those online, we do have translation services online. We'll be covering both Spanish and ASL today. All right, let's run through very, very quick high level of our agenda. So we'll be kicking things off here soon with our keynote speaker, and I'll introduce her momentarily. And then we've got our first panel session, which will be kind of covering and rethinking consumer incentives. We will have a networking break right after that. And for those that have participated in the past, we're doing something a little different this year in that we'll have breakout sessions this morning. So right after kind of our morning session, we'll go into some breakout sessions. You'll have 3 to choose from: overcoming zero-emission vehicle workforce development, community outreach, maintaining and developing community trust in outreach events, assessing progress towards equitable access to ZEVs, lessons learned on the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project. Once those conclude, we will have a lunch break. Lunch is served today. And then we will return back in here for panel session 2. And our panelists will be talking about bridging the mobility gap from planning implementation across urban and rural communities. We'll have another opportunity for networking and really take advantage of those guys. And then we will get back together for our PM breakout sessions. We've got, again, 3 of those that are telling our story, data collection in the real world, Cal-ITP's role in connecting clean transportation and mobility, and then challenges and barriers to e-bike adoption. So please find the places you're most interested in, engage in conversation, take a look at the data and the information that's being presented, ask questions. Really the goal of today is as much dialogue and networking and kind of team building as possible. All right, to wrap up my comments this morning, so I do want to make sure to thank our sponsors. We do have 3 sponsors today. Without them, we wouldn't be able to provide the snacks this morning, the coffee breaks, the drinks this afternoon, and our lunch. So thank you to Honda, California High-Speed Rail Authority, and South Coast AQMD. And then, of course, a special thanks to GRID, our partners in pulling off this event, and to the whole team, Catherine and the team, really remarkable job. Thank you guys so much. All right, and with that, I get the wonderful honors of passing things off to our keynote speaker, board member Diane Takvorian, former executive director and co-founder of the Environmental Health Coalition. She's going to kick us off with some inspiring words this morning. Thanks, Diane.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you. It's nice to be in person. I think I'm still in that pandemic. We all are in our homes, but we love everyone who's online with us. But it's super nice to have so many people here in the room that we can interact with. I'm really honored to be here today, and I really want to thank the team, Lisa's team, for inviting me to be here. It's really an honor. This is a really strong priority for me. I feel like our mobility, equity, transportation justice, transportation equity, whatever you want to call it, is critically important for us to meet our goals and for us to have clean air for everyone. So I'm really grateful to the whole CARB team who has put this together, grateful to all of you who have chosen to come here today. I'm really grateful to the legislature and to the governor for allocating billions of dollars over the last decade and more that has allowed all the fabulous programs that you all are doing right now to take place. So it's very exciting. Huge gratitude to the advocates and community members and environmental justice organizers who have really demanded that equity be a part of our transportation and mobility agenda. And all the people who are continuing to advocate that this be as fair and equitable and transparent and out there for everyone as possible. And also gratitude to for the technology advancements that folks have made that have allowed us to actually offer these kinds of technologies across the board to our community members. These things were not available, as you all know, a number of years ago, so we now have that opportunity. So today, the agenda is jam-packed. Lisa's right. There's so much to do today, and we want to get to that. And it's full of information and workshops about all of the topics that you all are working on. I took a look at all of the placards, and it's such good work that you all are doing. And I know you're going to talk about how well those programs are going, how you can evaluate to make them better. But I think to kick off, maybe, as an organizer, an environmental justice organizer for many years, and also as a CARB board member, I think we have to take a look at the larger policy and political environment, including the moment that we're in right now, and to think about how we're going to get through it, honestly. And to say that this moment is unprecedented in our country and in the world is probably a phrase that you've all heard 1,000 times a day in the last 3 months. So unprecedented is going to be one of those words that I think we will forever associate with this time period. For me, we're really caught between these feelings of devastation and hope. And devastation because of the ill-conceived and probably illegal actions that are taking place at the federal level are canceling the work that would have benefited millions of people that are in communities that desperately need this help across the country. And these are primarily communities of color, low-income communities, disadvantaged communities that are hit first and worst with climate and air pollution. These communities have worked so hard and have been so hopeful for so many years that work was finally paying off, and it is paying off here in California. It was going to pay off with affordable housing, paying off with clean energy, paying off with cleaner vehicles, green spaces, green jobs. And in many states, the federal support is all they have. And it's the only lifeline to these payoffs. In California, we've created our own lifelines. And we're working hard to ensure that those stay strong and that it continues to focus on equity. We owe it to ourselves and the rest of the country, I think, to make it work in California. So not to pile on, but we have not only the obligation to our own communities, but really to the rest of the country and to the world to say we can do it here, we will do it here, and we're going to do it in the face of a lot of pushback and adversity. So that's why our meeting today, saying it loud and proud, is on equity. It's on inclusion. It's on getting resources to people who need it the most, and in the process, really resulting in a cleaner California and a cleaner country. I love that we're moving towards that with full force. We're not blinking, we're just moving forward. And you're the leaders that are going to continue to light the way, to create that path that the country will see as the light and help us all to move forward. So if we kind of look at the problem that got us here, not the current problem, but the more historic problem, sorry. I could talk about that all day, but I'm not going to do that. And nobody told me I couldn't, but I'm just choosing. We'll get back to it, though. So everyone knows very well that California's transportation sector accounts for about 50% of all the state's greenhouse gas emissions and nearly 80% of the NOx pollution and 90% of the diesel pollution. So California recognized this about 60 years ago. And I grew up here in Los Angeles in the 60s, and I remember clearly, no pun intended, that the health impacts associated with smog, burning eyes and lungs, and reduced lung capacity, that's something I've always had, and low visibility. So the automobile was really identified as the main culprit, as you know, in the early 1950s by Ari Hagenschmidt, who was the founding CARB chair. And his research became the foundation upon which today's air pollution regulations are based. So California went after motor vehicle emissions, and in 1966, California established the first tailpipe emissions standards in the nation. And as just a quick reminder to whoever might be listening from the current federal administration, when the Federal Clean Air Act was adopted in 1970, it authorized California to set up its own separate and stricter than federal vehicle emissions regulations to address the extraordinary circumstances we faced then and that we continue to face today. So it was with that authority that CARB adopted the nation's first NOx emission standards for motor vehicles, and that was just the beginning. Under the provisions of the Federal Clean Air Act, CARB has, and the California Clean Air Act, California has adopted, implemented, and enforced a wide array of nation-leading air pollution control standards based on a strong foundation of science over many decades. And this regulatory history really reflects a strong relationship between California and the federal government during every administration in the past. Didn't matter whether it was Republican or administration. This has been a partnership that has allowed us to develop and implement these air pollution control strategies that have been proven models for other states, the nation, and really across the world, to develop zero-emission cars and trucks. Clearly, that history is being discarded, not remembered, erased off the website, but CARB leadership is pushing forward and pushing to dispel the myths and misinformation about California's clean car rules and implement them as quickly and fairly as possible. So California's focus on motor vehicles has made sense, and as a result of this groundbreaking work, Californians now breathe much cleaner air than they did 25 years ago. And according to the study that came out from Cal-ITP's OEHA and partners, the state's emission policies have reduced resident exposure of particulate matter 2.5 by about 65% since 2000. So that's huge. But we also know that these policies have not reduced the relative risk for communities of color that are exposed to the highest levels of pollution. While they have seen large reductions in PM 2.5 pollution, California's longtime racial disparities and exposure to vehicle air pollution persist. So the study, a quote from the study says that California has been remarkably effective at controlling pollution from on-road sources, from cars, light-duty trucks to heavy-duty vehicles, but there's no narrowing of the relative gap between the most exposed and least exposed racial and ethnic groups. So while overall pollution has gone down, the communities of color, low-income communities are still experiencing a relatively higher rate of exposure than the rest of California. And you know that fine particulate matter is linked to a wide range of adverse health effects and has been estimated to cause more than 5,000 premature deaths each year in California. Excuse me, do this. So part of the reason is because of discriminatory housing policies, including redlining. Communities of color live closer to highways and ports than predominantly white communities and subsequently breathe higher levels of pollution. These communities clearly suffer from more illness and death than others. And the new study adds to a growing body of evidence suggesting that targeting vehicle emissions alone will not be enough to close the air quality gap, even if the emissions are reduced to nearly zero. So that brings us to the importance of this meeting focused on transportation justice and equity. Because CARB recognizes that while all California residents face barriers to accessing clean transportation and mobility options, that the barriers that low-income communities and disadvantaged communities face are much greater. Transportation justice calls for addressing the ongoing disparities in transportation system benefits as well as burdens. We know that transportation planning and infrastructure decisions often ignore the needs of transportation disadvantaged population. This creates an inequitable outcome and results in situations where many cannot meet the basic needs for mobility and access. In general, drivers enjoy shorter travel times, greater accessibility, and better employment outcome than those who use other modes. So, in many, sorry, that's not the right page. So CARB recognized that these disparities, and they launched the programs that you're all here to talk about today, the clean mobility investments and sustainable equity, to ensure that vehicle incentives are fairly distributed. CARB also recognized that helping people get cleaner cars is not enough. Bolstered by the SB 350 report and many community meetings and outreach, the programs dedicated to incentivizing transition to zero emission have changed pretty significantly over the last decade. As you know, incentives now prioritize equity, recognizing that disadvantaged communities are more impacted by pollution and that they have fewer opportunities to get the resources. That's what you all are doing. When I first joined the board in 2016 as the first environmental justice rep, there were no income thresholds or community-specific requirements. We were just talking about this yesterday. So people with lots of money didn't need the incentives lined up, and in a first-come, first-served environment, they were able to access resources, and there was virtually no attention being paid to equity at the level that you all are doing it now. But these programs also recognize that vehicle incentives are not enough. The programs that you all are engaged in, that the program is so aggressively pushing out are zero-emission shuttles in environmental justice communities, like the one I live and work in National City and City Heights. We have e-bikes, transit resources, car sharing, and this is supported by CARB policy. Because of strong advocacy on the part of the environmental justice community. The 2022 scoping plan specifically calls for transportation equity by requiring a reduction in vehicle miles traveled by 25% below the 2019 levels by 2030 and 30% by 2045. So these targets really demonstrate the importance of your work, because the work you're doing is really working to reduce vehicle miles traveled. Despite the recognition, however, that transportation emissions are the drivers of climate pollution and unhealthy air, what do we know? California's vehicle miles traveled is still going up. So despite the knowledge that effective transit supports the facilitation of housing density, VMT is still going up. Despite the knowledge that there are projects on the books today and state funding that supports VMT increasing projects, and those still on the books today. We have the opportunities, I think, to ensure that other state plans and funding are very consistent with our VMT reduction goals. And so in closing, I just want to encourage you all to participate in the policy making. You're doing a fabulous job of getting out there with community members, of explaining the programs to them, which I know is sometimes difficult, and you're getting people engaged in the program and giving them real solutions. It's really triage, to get them the resources they need to live their lives every day. But we need the policies that will help us to keep moving forward, and transportation equity as the goal is the goal of ensuring that all community members have their needs met by the transportation systems available to them. And that means we have to do the whole array of work that you are all doing, plus probably things we haven't even thought of yet. So transitioning the transportation sector to zero-emission technologies is critical, I think, to achieving climate change goals and clean air. Despite the federal threats to dismantle these programs, we are moving forward. Yes, reducing VMT is just as critical, which requires support for transit, for bikes, for shuttles, and so much more. And while ZEVs are not enough to achieve the state's climate goals, we must really reduce the amount of driving and promote mass transit. So last thing I want to say is stay the course. This is a tough time, and we're all glued to our phones and whatever other devices we're using to see what the news of the day is. And we are, as advocates and organizers, we're familiar with setbacks. We come from immigrant communities. Our parents and grandparents worked hard for us to be here. They fought through a lot, mine through the Armenian genocide. So that's my personal obligation is they went through hell to get here and survived so that I could have this life. So, and I'm sure you all have stories like that in your own lives. And so it's our obligation to keep fighting. And as my grandmother used to say, you kind of don't know what hardship is when I would start to complain about whatever. So I think we all know that. We all have our version of that story. And so that's our obligation. We all know it. That's why you're in this room. And I was moved by Senator Booker last week, who said a lot in 25 hours. But one of the things he said that's getting a lot of play and I think is important is these are not normal times in America, and they should not be treated as such. And I think that bears repeating because advocates, community, and CARB have normalized the recognition of disparities, of health inequities, of the requirement to move beyond a one-size-fits-all approach to our policies and programs. And that cannot change through any capitulation or denial of our values and priorities. He also said, in this democracy, the power of the people is greater than the people in power. So you've got the power. You're using it to be here today. You're using it every day in your communities. I commend you for that and ask you to keep going forward. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Have a wonderful conference.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay? I feel inspired. Let's have another round of applause for Diane Takvorian. Thank you so much for that wonderful keynote address, and thank you to everyone for being here, everyone in the room, and everyone online. We really appreciate having you all here as a part of these conversations. My name is Michaela Elder. I'm with CARB, and I'm going to be your MC today, just helping transition between panels and breakout rooms. So the first panel session that we're going to have right after this is on the Cal-ITP Integrated Travel Planning Project on rethinking consumer incentives to enable the next phase of sustainable transportation transition. It's going to be about an hour and 10 minutes, followed by a 20-minute break. And just a heads up to people online, on the agenda, it's going to be a different Zoom link, so make sure that you click into the appropriate Zoom link for your room. And it's going to be moderated by Annalise Czerny from Rebel Group, so I can go ahead and hand it over to her and the remaining panelists as well. Thank you.
is the All Friends panel. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here. Nice to see all of you in the room and online. Hi. Thanks so much for this hour plus, which is unprecedented, I think. I'm Annalise. I'm a consultant with Rebel, but more importantly, I lead a bunch of our work for the California Integrated Travel Project on behalf of Gillian at the end of the table and Caltrans. And we work, well, I won't even introduce, Gillian will introduce it. The theme of our panel is Rethinking Consumer Incentives and Enabling the Next Phase of Sustainable Transportation Transition. And so before we kick off, maybe just all three of my panelists, starting with Lisa, if you want to introduce yourselves.
All right. For those who don't know me, I'm Lisa Macumber, the branch chief of the Equitable Mobility Incentives branch at CARB. My incredible team works on implementing everything from our light-duty vehicle purchase incentive programs, our e-bike incentive programs, and majority of our mobility projects. And works really, really hard each year to develop a funding plan by which all of the funding for these projects is figured out after the budget is finalized. So you work with most of my team who helped pull off this event today. So,
Yeah.
Hi, good morning. I'm Vacin. I'm the Deputy Director for the Zero Emission Vehicle Market Development Office at GoBiz, which, if you don't know the acronym, is Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. And our team really focuses on helping to improve cross-agency alignment and coordination, and working also then, being an economic development office, right, working with the private sector to understand what the challenges are on the ground and how do we raise up those kinds of barriers and opportunities and think about ways in which we can help from the government side. And then we do a lot of work helping with just removing barriers and challenges on the ground. So an example would be permit streamlining for zero-emission vehicle infrastructure. So we kind of go where we need to go and are here to sort of serve and support the great work that all of the other agencies are doing, as well as the private sector. Thanks.
Cool. I'm Gillian Gillet. I am oddly at Caltrans. Most people don't know that Caltrans actually regulates and is responsible for most of the transit in the state of California. We also build freeways, but we are sort of the biggest player in transit. I run the California Integrated Mobility Program at Caltrans, which houses Cal-ITP. Mostly, I'm lucky to work with both Lisa and Gia. And my job at the Integrated Mobility Program is to remove barriers between different kinds of transportation and within each mode of transportation, starting with transit, trip planning, and payment. And so I just want to quickly hijack Annalise's moderation. I always like to start when I have a chance to speak with people to do a little surveying to understand who's in the room. So I'm going to ask you, how many of you use an iPhone, have an iPhone? You just look around at each other while you're, how many of you use an Android? Right? Many more iPhones than Android, right? How many of you pay for things mostly using a credit card? Most of the room, right? How many of you pay for things mostly using a debit card? Some. And how many of you pay for things mostly using cash? Okay, so you're all rich. Seriously, in the United States, you can pretty much tell somebody's income by the way they pay for things. You can also tell somebody's income by how they connect to the internet. So the iPhone is a luxury product. Most of the world and most of the poor people use, and most lower income people use Androids. So you're not representative of most Americans. And most Americans pay with, there are far more Americans who pay with debit than with credit. Credit is a wealthier person's thing, and of course, lower income people use a whole lot of cash. So just wanted to set the table a little bit. Go ahead, Annalise.
I've been working with Gillian for 4 years, so I was expecting something. No, and it's a great tee up because actually, I wrote down board member Takvorian spoke specifically about equity and us staying the course, and this entire panel actually was set up to talk not about the focus of the larger part of today, which is how do we do our jobs well in terms of running and measuring incentive programs, but this panel was about kind of stepping back and elevating and saying, why are we doing it? And so, yeah, Gillian's tee up was exactly right. So maybe I'll kick off with Lisa. Why incentives specifically? What is CARB's role, yes, in the decarbonization of the transportation network, but what role do incentives play, maybe in the past, but specifically today?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We take a multi-pronged approach to making sure that we can clean the air. Traditionally, we've got kind of the hammer, the carrot, the stick, the carrot, however you want to break it down, right? But we have a significant number of rules and that we set at CARB and within the air districts to ensure that folks that are polluting in some way either don't pollute past a certain level or are using the cleanest technology or the cleanest appropriate measures that they can. But just setting that rule isn't always enough. Or sometimes we need the air to be cleaner quicker. We need to make efforts a whole lot faster. And the only way you're going to get industry and get folks to do that really is by offering some type of incentive, getting folks comfortable with what it is the goal they need to get to in the long run, or the technology that they need to consider at some point. Incentives really give us an opportunity to reach people at a very different level than just telling them, you must do this. Instead, we give them a choice. By giving them a choice, they're going to be more likely to pay attention, to learn about it, to understand it better, and potentially make that choice at a time that is helpful overall for air quality, for the climate, and potentially for your community as well. So our standpoint, kind of our philosophy around incentives is trying to find ways, and we look really at technology. So from the transportation sector, we're trying to get the cleanest technology out there, but that technology, maybe it's only ready still to kind of demonstrate, right? So at CARB, we have incentives that are focused on how can you bring zero emission technology to sectors that don't have it yet? How do we create the vehicles or the equipment that don't exist to really help get an industry in that direction? And so we try to invest first in that space, and then slowly, how do we then pilot that? How do we get a few more of those things out in one location? Or how do we get those things to talk to other elements of technology to really work together? And then finally, it's how do we bring the masses along? Actually, not finally. That's just next. Finally is once you've got the general masses and you've kind of got some buy-in where folks are starting to really get it, then our historical standpoint has been to then pivot and say, okay, now we really need to make sure that we aren't leaving anybody out. And so we've always kind of invested on kind of that curve of a lot of money for a few projects, and then a little bit more money for groups of projects, less money, but targeted towards a lot more people, right? And then back to more money for less people, but because we got to make sure nobody's being left out. Not everybody can really participate at that mass adoption place. And that's where we were in the vehicle purchase incentive place with the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project. And I know we've got a panel on that later today, and we'll talk about how that has kind of helped get us to this space of focusing on equity. And while we know it's very important not to forget equity from the start, we recognize that fully, but we also understand how trying to find that right balance with industry and making sure that as we're taking these steps, we are considering what those equity impacts are going to be and where we demonstrate things and how we try things out, and then how we ultimately bring things from commercialization into communities. And so it's a hard, delicate balance, but the incentives are really critical. If we don't invest, it will take us forever to get there. And we may not actually get where we need to be. So the incentives, I think, have really given us opportunities to move a whole lot faster along that path and grab a lot more folks than we would have otherwise.
Anything to add from? No? Yeah, I think it's great. Maybe Jay, I'll turn to you next. And it certainly builds on what Lisa just said about kind of this transition and the phases going, that are necessary to really make, a sector evolve. This idea of transitioning the state's focus from new market development to equity, as we have been already kicked off, is essential. And I wanted to, maybe you could speak to the evolved mandate that GoBiz itself has gone through in this space, because it has changed quite a bit from its early phases to where we are today.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so I think just starting biggest picture here, we think about this administration and Governor Newsom's real kind of focus and in on having this kind of, you've probably heard the California for all, right? So creating a situation that's inclusive of all kinds of Californians, regardless of, you know, socioeconomic status, geographic location, those kinds of things. And so we lead the, excuse me, development of a zero-emission vehicle market development strategy. And in fact, that was first released in 2021. There's an update that is about to be released now, but it's built on a set of core principles. And the first one is equity in every decision. So thinking through how do we better look at this lens when not as an afterthought, right, but as we're building programs, as we're thinking about how we build incentive programs, like how is that in the conversation in the start, not, oh, and by the way, what about the other people? And so, you know, in recent years, as Annalise said, we're really moving beyond just these early adopters into being more kind of accessible and inclusive of all regions and all communities. And so this means getting more infrastructure built in areas that have been historically left behind. It means making sure that lower income Californians can have the opportunity to buy or choose to ride in a zero-emission vehicle or have clean mobility options. I mean, transit is a huge piece of this. It means transitioning our heavy-duty trucks and medium-duty trucks so that we have cleaner corridors where there's pollution. And I think a lot of this also is around job creation and workforce development, an area that I think we've always sort of had a mind to, but there's definitely more of a focus on that now. And so I think that's part of where the shift has been. And then I think it's also thinking even more closely about it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. So how do we really tailor these solutions to the individual and community needs? And our state is big, and it has a lot of diversity, and that's part of what we love about it. It also makes all of this harder because it means we need more tools and more solutions that are applied in the right place. So we're thinking through some of those pieces, and you know, Lisa mentioned some of this transition we've seen between the CVRP now, you know, wholly into Clean Cars for All, some of the transitions in the portfolio investments of CARB and CEC into, you know, kind of more identified DACs. And then I think, as I think about where we're going, I think we have a really strong foundation here, both policy-wise and kind of in thinking about incentives. But I really think that we're still missing the real connection between where the people that we're wanting to help uplift more or connect with better, and them really, really feeling this, right? So we're missing that piece, and I think we're approaching it, and we're improving, but we're definitely not there yet. And so I'll talk a little bit more about some of the other things that we're doing specifically in our office, but I think just this greater focus on kind of defining and integrating zero-emission vehicle equity into our programs and processes is really, you know, we're farther along that continuum now.
Maybe that's a good pivot to Gillian. I mean, you kicked off by asking people how they pay for things, and maybe you can speak to, you know, your feelings, Cal-ITP's approach to incentives in the mobility space, not only in EV, but more largely, you know, sustainable transportation. Maybe can you just, share what the overarching goals are, but maybe some examples also of the specific work that we've been doing, in this area.
Sure. So I'm a little bit of a ringer in government service. I came from the private sector, and I am a retired software developer, but I used to work in banking and financial services in the financial services sector. So I always think about things at scale, because banking is about a lot of transactions, right? Not just a few. And I also am super lazy. I mean, human beings are lazy, so I'm not that unusual. But like, so I don't like to reinvent the wheel. And so if you want to scale things, you want to really focus on the most important thing and lazily pawn everything off on something that already exists. So the analysis, one of the reasons that I came to the public sector is because of this problem. And what happens a lot in the public sector, especially in transit, which is kind of where I, first got slotted in, is that we say, okay, we need it to work for everybody, and therefore we need to create something special for these special people. And so you get these fragmented programs. We have many, many, many programs that are all essentially trying to get to the same people. So let's really think about the problem from a scale perspective. And so what we have in the United States is that roughly 30% of the people in the United States are either underbanked or unbanked, meaning they don't have access to credit, and they're really poorly served by the financial services sector. They don't have great ways to pay, and it's these people who are disproportionately using cash. And I think we have, sort of fallen down on the job and said, well, poor people want to pay with cash. We have to preserve cash at all costs because that's what poor people want to pay with. And if you actually ask poor people what they want to pay with, they don't want to pay with cash. It's just that they don't have great options. What I've done, coming from the private sector, is go and talk to private sector people that do this at scale. So if you're in the government, you don't have to have this standoff relationship with the private sector, where the only time you can talk to the private sector is through a contract, through an RFP. So the financial networks on the globe are run by companies that have established these global networks. So it's Visa, MasterCard, to a smaller extent, Amex, and Discover have created these global networks. You can use your credit card or your debit card and pay for almost anything, anywhere in the world, but not for government services, especially not for transit. So what we've done is worked with the private sector to see what is in the way of helping the 30% of Americans who are or underbanked get banked. Because that's really what they need, right? That is how incentives work in the world. That is how financial inclusion works. And that is how you access things, by paying them. So we are working towards making sure that everybody has a great digital, safe way to pay, a debit card at least, and that all merchants in government programs, especially transit agencies who disproportionately serve lower income people, can accept debit and credit cards. You need both in order to have the cycle going. So the way that we started was following what's already happened in Europe, where in Europe you can mostly just pay for transit straight with your debit or credit card. That's what you do, straight on the bus, straight on the train. You don't have to go stand at a ticket vending machine, stand in line, change real money into tap money, whatever that is, or clipper money, whatever that is. It's not postage stamps here. So just let people pay for transit the same way they pay for a t-shirt. Seems pretty obvious, right? And yet we spent decades not doing that. So that's the first thing, make sure that all the transit agencies can just speak point of sale. And then really start attacking the problem of how do we help people who are underbanked get banked? And we were fortunate enough to start working with CARB pretty quickly, because CARB and Caltrans work together on transit anyway, but poor people drive too, right? It's not, yes, poorer people disproportionately take transit, but the longest lines at the toll bridges and any place where you're paying for using the road are always the cash paying lines, right? So currently we have this fiction of, if you don't have the RFID reader on your car, we take a picture of your license plate and we send you a letter at home, asking you to pay for the toll, right? That transaction of putting in the infrastructure to take a photocopy of your license plate and then sending you that letter, it's, for most of the tolling agencies, it's close to $100 to do one of those. The toll is like, what, $4, $5? The money that we're spending on the infrastructure to build these programs to account for the people that can't pay, it's like nutty, right? Like, we should really be thinking about the problem the right way and solve the problem at the right level, right? Which is get people banked. So that's what we do. Thank you.
We could go on and on.
We could, and I will, so you can shut me up.
No, but I think that's, I mean, the reason that we put this fireside chat together and these panelists together was specifically because there is this interlinked objectives across the agencies about addressing the gaps, getting money to the right places, which means both the right communities and the right technologies. And so kind of to revert back to incentives, one of the things is that we are at a critical time right now. And how do your organizations, and maybe do a snippet and then we can build, and also please save up your questions. We're going to hand out the microphones in a little bit. But, you know, at the time we're at now, how does getting money into the right community members' hands or the right community organizations' hands, how does that fit into your respective visions? Whoever wants to go first.
Lisa.
Oh, you're kicking that back to me first.
Don't you think? You're doing it.
So it's, oh, closer.
Yeah, thank you.
There we go. Thanks, sorry.
Microphone's closer.
I gave you time to
Give us
think.
time, yes. Well, so, again, we do try to incorporate equity from the very beginning, but again, recognizing too how we get funded through the state. So majority of these incentives are funded on an annual basis, which makes it very hard for us to ensure continuity. And we know that, especially when we're talking about consumers that or just individuals that need incentives to be able to make the purchase or to access the transit, to do the thing that we want to help them do, the money needs to be there in a consistent manner, right? And so for us, ensuring that the funding is there is really, really critical. And then building the relationships and building the networks, I think, is the other component to this that's super helpful and important. And so within all of our projects, building those partnerships and bringing in community-based organizations, grassroots, even individuals, to have these conversations with us and to figure out how we really prioritize and make sure that the incentives are structured in the right way, that they're hitting the right that they're hitting kind of that right level, that the incentive amounts are the right type of amounts, that they're actually impactful for you to be able to make those decisions, right? Those are all, I think, really core kind of components to just start the conversation.
Nice. Anything to?
Yeah, sure. So let's see. The first thing that we try to do is do demonstrations with as many people and as many kind of programs as we can in order to build the network that we need to be built, right? So first of all, when I started at Caltrans, no transit agency could accept debit and credit because the point-of-sale terminals for transit just didn't exist in the United States. So we worked with Visa and got some, they gave some to transit agencies in Monterey. Salinas is where we started, and we strapped point-of-sale terminals onto their buses during COVID. And simply that, by the very next day, people were tapping. And the general manager of the transit agency called me and said, Jesus Christ, people, like the only people that are taking my service right now are really poor people, and they're tapping, they have debit cards. And he was amazed by that. He just assumed that, you know, poor people are gonna pay with cash, right? So it was like, yeah, and I said, duh. Like, sorry. So what we wanna do is find demonstration partners first to see how we can get stuff out there, right? And so we, have since then worked with the Department of General Services to get mass contracts in place so that both local agencies and state agencies can get point-of-sale terminals and all of the software services and banking services that they need to accept payment. I think for a lot of people in this room, you don't need that. Transit agencies do need that. They actually need the hardware and the services to accept payment. But then we've also working on the other side, which is in demonstrations when we work with somebody, making sure that we can bring along a partner, a financial services partner, to help solve this problem of the and underbanked. So in Monterey, we brought the Cash App with us. So the Cash App bought 1 or 2 billboards in Salinas saying, use the Cash App to pay for Monterey Salinas Transit, get $1 off. So they bought that. I didn't have to pay for it, it wasn't a contract. And they put their marketing money in the dollar rebate. So that's all they had to do. So for the 6 months that we first did a demonstration, the 30% of the Cash App's new customers in that service area in Monterey were directly attributable to this idea, meaning the very first time a customer used their Cash App product was on a Monterey Salinas bus. Why? Well, because they were getting $1 off, that's an incentive, and the trip is $1.75, so that's a pretty good discount, but also because they trust their bus driver, they trust their bus company, and it's only a $2 experiment, right? So people are willing to try something with their friendly local bus driver that they're not necessarily going to try elsewhere. So at the end of the 6-month period of the demonstration, 93% of the transactions of those new customers were not for transit, they were for everything else, mostly food, meaning that transit does what it's been known to do elsewhere in the world, which is it's sort of like reefer madness. You know, you start with dope and then you work your way. No, I'm kidding. I'm trying to make sure it's a gateway drug. Right? I'm trying to make sure everybody's awake. But the idea is you'll try something here, right, and then you'll get used to it. So that's exactly what happened with the Cash App. Is that like now all of a sudden there's all these people in Monterey Salinas that use the Cash App to pay for all sorts of stuff, and they started with transit, right? So in that case in Monterey, we brought a company with us, but you know. All we were doing was just telling a company, hey, just do what you normally do, just do a little bit of advertising here because we think there are new customers for you here. So we've been working with the financial services sector to point this out to them that, hey, there are transit agencies all over California and let's work together. But and then I'll shut up, sorry, Annalise. The other thing that we're doing is we're making sure right now, courtesy of support from GoBiz and CARB, is we're working with the Department of General Services to make sure that there is a group of contracts for prepaid debit cards for local agencies and for state agencies that we will procure using what we know about how financial services work and incentives work, so that if you're running a program, you can pick one of these card issuers and just lump your program onto that. And you don't have to worry about how to figure all of this stuff out yourselves, because we think that we now have the relationship with Visa and MasterCard and with the financial services sector to get a really high quality, safe product, reliable product that is designed to scale for government programs. And then the final thing, actually, and then I'll shut up, is that we worked with the California Department of Technology to try to address the issue of eligibility verification. Because I very shortly, I'm going to be entitled to my senior discount on transit. So when I tap my card, I want to make sure that I get my, 50% off on transit, right? And it's got to be on my card. And I'm not going to go to each transit agency and fill out a ton of paperwork to prove that I'm over 65, right? And that's how it works today. For every single transit discount, there are 253 transit agencies in California. Currently, if I'm a senior, I have to go to each one separately to apply for my discount, and I get to do that every year because I'm going to get younger. Right? Or if I'm disabled because my leg is going to grow back next year. That's what we're doing with the customer, and we're doing that to the customer success team at the transit agency. The customer support team has to look at your driver's license. That is crazy. If I give you a driver's license in California, you can use it in Massachusetts. If I give you a blue placard in California, you can use it in Massachusetts. If I give you a transit discount on Monterey Salinas Transit, you can only use it in Monterey Salinas Transit. We have to solve this problem. So the California Department of Technology, for us, built a gateway, and it connects to login.gov, which is the single sign-on system of the federal government, or to other data sources, and allows an end user, like a senior or a person with disabilities or a Medicare card holder or a CalFresh recipient, to verify their eligibility and associate that eligibility with their payment method. Bingo. And then we've solved the problem. So any program that wants to work Cal-ITP way could put these things together. And that's what we do, and we're having the joy of doing that. We've done a couple of experiments with CARB in the EV space in particular to make sure that the lower income people who are more likely to need to charge on the road, right? Because rich people are going to have a garage and are going to be able to recharge at home. If you're lower income, you're going to need to recharge on the go. How are you going to pay for that? Well, you need a debit card to pay for that, and that's better than the chargers taking cash, right? That would be insane to have the chargers take cash. So this stuff needs to work, and that's why we're sort of coming together and trying to put it in place. Sorry.
No, I want to give GS some space because I mean, the original question was, yeah, how do incentives fit into your programs? And think, you know, GoBiz's perspective is about ensuring agency coordination, ensuring this a relationship with the private sector, in particular Californian companies. How does incentives fit into the work that you guys are doing in terms of achieving that vision of accelerating the transition, but also the equity focus?
Yeah. Well, GoBiz isn't a funding body or a regulatory body, so it's less directly, right? It's more around helping to connect these dots, right? So what Gillian's talking about, I know you're all going to be surprised to hear that the agencies often don't know what the other agencies are doing. I know it's shocking. It's only happening in California. So really around helping to leverage lessons learned, like let's not reinvent the wheel. All the years of work that Gillian's done, let's use that and learn from that and apply that to other programs. And so I think for us, the way that we're thinking about, and same with incentives, right? We can hear from the maybe the private sector or from communities that we're reaching out to, what's working, what's not working. So it's really kind of that feedback loop, and how do we help to sort of connect those dots? And I think that that's probably the primary role that GoBiz plays in this way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I can speak to, you know, having met all three of these amazing leaders in conversations like that, where we're saying, wait a minute, we're doing something over here that really we can collectively, we get together, you know, 2 + 2 = 5, and not 4. So I think, yeah, you definitely see it on the ground. I'm going to do one more question to the panel and then put it out to the audience. So think of your questions, and I know there's going to be some microphones roving around. Maybe before we go to the audience, you know, we all know, and Board Member Takvorian talked about it, these are turbulent times. And maybe just like a quick snippet, but I did want to ask all of you, what does this mean, this kind of change at the federal level, in terms of how your agencies and your objectives are being looked at or are being fulfilled, you know, in terms of the next couple of years at least? How are you thinking about this uncertainty, but also potential change in kind of the conversation that's happening around us, but not in this room?
Well, this is a challenging one to not get on your soapbox about. So I think from the incentives perspective, I'll stay away from the program perspective, right? Because that's definitely a touchier one. But from the incentives perspective, we're funded primarily from the state, from state budget. And so the good news for our partners is that while those of you that do run smaller programs that maybe get funding from state and federal, your state dollars are okay. Like you don't have to worry about your partnership with the state right now. In fact, we're coming out of a couple of really tough budget years here in the state where I know that caused a lot of anxiety, a lot of kind of tumultuous work to figure out, okay, if we're in this really huge state deficit, what is that gonna mean? And then now we're on the other side, or we're coming out of the other side of that, and now we're dealing with what's happening on the federal, in the federal space. But the state dollars, I mean, for lack of a better word, are relatively secure in that once we've granted with you, and some of you have seen this, we fight to make sure your grants stay as they've been structured, as they've been set up, and what we've committed to you to make sure that your programs can carry out the objectives that they've set. And so that partnership, that's really important for our partnership. It's important for building that trust, especially when we're trying to work so hard in these types of communities. That trust is so important. And while we can't entirely make up what potential losses there could be on the federal side, know that we're still here as your partners and as your resource. We know that it is going to be really tough, especially for those of you that are co-funded. But we will work with you to figure out how we ensure that your projects can still thrive in this type of an environment. And to Diane's point earlier, we are going to keep moving forward. Absolutely. We are not going to let what potentially can begin to happen here set us back at all from the progress that we've been making in the light duty space, in the mobility space. We're going to continue to invest. We do hope to see some dollars in this year's state budget that can help us grow, especially in the mobility space. So there's a lot more work to be done, and we're here to continue to be your partners to get that work done.
Hear, hear. Gia?
Yeah, thanks. Well, just echoing what Lisa said, I think ZEV equity remains a real priority, and now more than ever, and we're not backing down from this. And so I'm feeling especially grateful right now. We're lucky enough that our programs, I mean, not that we give incentives, but our staff and our team are also not relying on federal dollars. And so, and I'm feeling really lucky right now that we have a statutory requirement to push forward some ZEV equity initiatives. So, and helping us really kind of keep leaning in. So I hadn't mentioned before, but SB 1251 actually established a zero emission vehicle equity advocate on our team, and give a shout out to Nydia, who's here, and talk to her. She is probably more qualified to be sitting up here than me on these topics. And also we have this year an executive fellow, Valeria, sitting there next to her, and working on this as well. So our team, we actually have like a real team working on this now. And it also, that bill directs us to create a ZEV equity definition for like a statewide definition on what that really means. And it also directs us to create a ZEV equity action plan. And this is in collaboration with the agencies, it's in collaboration with community, and both of those efforts are underway now. We're also really focusing in on where we can make a difference and actually move the needle still, and there are a lot of different ways that we can do that. It's a little bit of a tricky balance, a trickier balance, because we're in a time where, I'm gonna be honest, like the auto manufacturers and the infrastructure providers are flipping out. They're really concerned, especially because the regulations aren't quite as, they're not as sure as they were before, and that will play out. But for right now, the private sector is really nervous. And so how do we think about continuing to push forward, advancing the market when the headwinds are stronger? And we can do it. The strategies are a little bit different and the tactics are a little bit different. So we have to be smarter and a little more nimble and more creative. And I think that's the part that, if we can get past the like nausea, is like kind of the exciting part, right? Like that's kind of fun to think about and do. And so, yeah, just really, we remain committed to a fossil-free future, and we're going to push forward, and an inclusive one. And then I guess just reiterating that cross-agency alignment and making sure that we're not duplicating efforts, and that we're really utilizing the resources we have the best we can, and connecting with communities and individuals, tribal and rural and otherwise, that maybe we haven't in the past, that have been overlooked. I think that's really how we can grow the coalition that we're going to need to continue to grow to endure these next time period. I'm not going to say 4 years because I'm still feeling like.
Quickly bounce to Gillian.
Yeah, I can say these things because I work for Governor Newsom, so
Yeah, Gillian, thoughts about opportunities and challenges?
Well, just a quick thing. Look, it's, obviously I'm an equity advocate. I grew up super poor, but equity is also efficiency, right? Especially in transportation, we're in the network business, right? We want, the network should work for everybody. If it doesn't work for everybody, it causes congestion. Congestion is bad in traffic, right? So a network that only works for 70% of the people, roughly, is not a great network, right? If it were birth control, we'd all be really freaked out, right? Sorry, this is me. So you want 99%. How do you get 99%? Well, everybody has to be part of the network. So it's an efficiency argument. It is good business to get everybody banked. And another way to talk about this is to think about the cost of acquiring a customer, right? Everybody in the private sector wants to sell you something, and they're willing to spend money to get you to be their customer, right? Their marketing budgets, their incentives, their discounts. So you should know how much the private sector spends to acquire a customer. A brick and mortar style traditional bank spends $10,000 to acquire a new customer. In retail, it's generally around $100 to acquire a customer. So if you know things like that, if you know, you can start asking businesses that you know, how much money do you spend to acquire a new customer? They are spending serious bucks to get customers. What do we have? Customers. The people that we work with are the only customers left, really, that haven't been part of this system yet. So they're willing, the private sector it's good business for them to have more business. They're willing to spend money to get our customers to be able to buy their stuff more easily. So that is just something to keep in mind as you move forwards, that business is still going to function, even in the current environment, and that we represent this 30% of people, of Americans who are not destitute generally, right? They're just, they're not wealthy, but they have money, and they're just not well represented currently. So we can help them get represented. I think to me, that's just remember during this crazy time that business is not going to stop working, and just keep going.
Nice. Maybe I'll open it up to the floor. There's a question right here. I see 3 already, so maybe at the front, the gentleman right there at the back, and then Nydia, whose hand I saw go up as well. 3rd.
Hello, good morning. Sadia. I'm very happy to see everybody here. I'm Jill Sherman Warren from the Native American Environmental Protection Coalition. All of you guys pretty much know me. And Gillian, maybe it's a Jill thing. You rock. Just from the things that I said, but it was only your presentation that I heard because I came late. When you're looking at partners like here, if I look around in the room, is anyone receiving EBT? Does anyone know what EBT is? Okay. Does anyone receive temporary aid to needy families, TANF? Anybody receiving TANF? Have they received? Is anybody on Social Security? Do you know somebody who's on Social Security? Okay. So I'm asking those questions because I think, like you, when you come from a poor background where money is tight, I grew up eating a lot of deer meat and a lot of smoked salmon. I appreciate that now, but at the time I didn't. I thought I was going to have gills. You don't know about these programs, right? And EBT, and you would have to ask, is anyone from the Department of Health and Human Services, California Department of Health and Human Services here? No. They're a partner, right? Because they have a chip on the EBT card that has your money for food, money that you can go to an ATM and take cash out, and those people typically go to Chime or Cash App, right? They're putting money into those accounts so that they can use the Visa card.
Yep.
Also, if you have Social Security uses a MasterCard chip, right? So if you were receiving funds from Social Security, it comes on a card, or it's deposited in a bank. But it can't, if you don't have a bank, they put it on a MasterCard.
Yep.
With a chip. So those 2 agencies, Social Security and Department of Health and Human Services, should be agencies that you want to partner with because people are already using quote-unquote banking stuff. So that's an idea for
100%.
A partnership.
Yep. Thank you.
Then my other questions, though, is do you, Gillian, happen to know how many Californians only have PLPD insurance? And the reason I ask that is because there are people out there who are only doing the very basic insurance. I was hit by a drunk driver who only had PLPD, and what I found out, and I encourage everyone here to get something on an insurance coverage called underinsured driver, which I didn't have at the time. But, I was in a wheelchair for 3 years, so it was, I lived, she died, very unusual for that. But I'm curious about the PLPD users, how many in California, because I think that's also an indicator that we need to look at
Agreed.
For incentives. Also, is anyone here from the CPUC? No? Where are they at? They need to be at the table because our infrastructure doesn't work. And, I'm working in the space of trying to communicate this message of going to zero emissions vehicles to tribal communities. But they simply aren't ready because the infrastructure, we have Electrify America and you can go on there and find out where a charger is. but 90% of the time it's not working.
Right.
Because nobody's paying attention, right?
Right.
And so when you talk to tribal people on the reservation who have taken the leap to go to an electric vehicle, there's a huge learning curve. And the huge learning curve comes with needing to install an actual industrial size outlet to charge their vehicle. And they need to charge their vehicle at home because more than likely chargers near and around them are not going to work, right?
Right.
So it's not, if they only need to make a quick trip into town, let's say from Campo to downtown San Diego, that's all they can do is go to that spot and go back home and have a fast charger. Because the other thing is you want fast chargers, right?
Right.
And I know that infrastructure's level 2s, I think, are going away at some point, but we haven't really talked about that. Anyway, we need the electrical industry to be a part of this conversation because they're the ones who will have
Agreed.
to build the infrastructure, right? East LA can't get chargers because of the infrastructure.
Right.
Reservations can't get chargers because of the infrastructure. And so those are really big issues. And then also just with anyone from emergency services here? No, because the PSPS events, right? So we have PSPS events that come on, and where's our partners, right? We need to, this discussion needs to include emergency services.
Absolutely.
CPUC, we need to have the industry, the electrical, the people giving us gas and power at this table. We need to have the insurance agencies at this table, because guess what? I was just at a meeting, an organizing meeting, and I was telling them, go ahead and get electric cars with dead batteries if they really wanted to block a road, because the only way to move them is with a flatbed truck.
Yep.
And that's reality. So, sorry, didn't mean to take up time, but where's our partners?
That's a
Fabulous.
great question. If I can, so let's see. First of all, thank you very much for your comment. We have thought about the Social Security debit cards, right? Like, there's a tendency when as a result of all of our well-meaning programs, what we do is we make sure that lower income people have these like fat wallets with all these different cards in them, right? What we're not giving them is the one card that we all have, right? Like, I lose now my credit card is in my phone and in my watch, right? So I just call an 800 number and my stuff gets replaced, right? So we need to move towards that world, and a lot of that is us working together because we, as a group, are causing that problem, right? In terms of the infrastructure, I think that is a really great point that this is kind of the way that I would answer the keynote speaker's point, which is even given what's going on, it doesn't matter what's happening in DC to a certain extent. California is the 4th largest economy in the world. We can make the change. And look around, our stuff doesn't work, right? It was always stupid that you had to drive around looking at the big signs at the outsides of gas stations to get the better price, right? Like, that's just dumb. You want to know, let's think about this the way that Silicon Valley does, which is think about it from the ideal customer experience. The ideal customer experience is my car tells me or gives me options for where to get the cheapest gas because it knows, because there's GPS in the car. So if the gas station industry had its shit together, it would have already figured out a data standard so that Google Maps is already telling you where to go. In the transit space, which is oddly a leader in this, if you can now plan a trip on transit in Google Maps, I don't know how many of you have done that, but the reason that you can do that is not because Google's doing anything fancy. All that happened is people got together and said, okay, let's create a data standard so that transit agencies can report their data in a standardized way, and then Google will vacuum up the data and report it on maps. That's how Google trip planning on transit works. So every transit agency that speaks Google, that speaks this standard called GTFS, publishes its schedule, its stop locations, and other specific information in a specific way and puts it on their website, and Google and Apple vacuum all that up. Why don't we have that for EV chargers? EV chargers, your car should know where every EV charging station is. It should know what the price of that recharger is, and it should know whether it's working or not. It should also know, does it take Discover, because I have Discover. Those are easy things to communicate in a digital environment, and we already have Google and Apple, and they are dying for this industry to do that. So to me, that's a big piece of the infrastructure question, right, is you would reduce a lot of the anxiety if we got our shit together and started asking for the right things and involving the right partners. And I think your point about the CPUC is absolutely spot on, right? We do need additional partners. And I'll give one more example of like how dumb we are when we're doing this kind of thing, and then I'll shut up, so we had these awful fires here. And I was watching the fires and I was thinking, oh my God, all these people are gonna need benefits because their houses just burned up, right? Sure enough, people who are wealthy in Pacific Palisades can't prove to their insurance companies that they owned a house because they can't get a copy of the title of their house because it burned with their house. How do they digitally quickly get a copy, right, of their title? So I'm not that worried about the people in Pacific Palisades. They'll figure it out, right? But the fire department didn't know where people with disabilities were in order to help them evacuate. So they were just operating blind, right? So what's going to happen now? Well, the LA Fire Department is now asking to build a database of persons with disabilities. No.
But also,
It's so dumb.
we have that information already.
We already have the information.
We don't need to build a new database.
We don't need a new database. Who has the best database in the state of California of all the people with disabilities?
DMV.
DMV. DMV already knows. Why can't DMV help the Department of Technology put out a tweet or a text, because they operate the emergency texting system, to everybody in a given emergency zone saying, hey, do you need evacuation? Here's your local paratransit agency. Because we have paratransit. Do you understand? Every transit agency, there's 253 of them in California, is required to give paratransit. And they have paratransit drivers who are specially trained to move people with disabilities in special vehicles. Does the fire department have that? No. If you need to evacuate somebody in 5 minutes, sure, use a firefighter. But if you know that you need to start evacuating people in the next 48 hours, who should do it? Paratransit drivers and paratransit vehicles. We're already paying for them, and the DMV knows who they should evacuate. Could we just do this kind of stuff? Like, it's not rocket science. The LA Fire Department knows nothing about data privacy or security or databases. What the hell are they creating a database of people with disabilities for? I'm sorry, am I the only person that is like, it smells bad in here? We need to think our way out of these problems.
We've gotten off topic.
I want to be here all day if you wanted to.
We have 20 minutes left. I saw 2 more questions in the audience. There's probably more now from this.
But really quick,
yeah.
really quick on when it comes to our partners in the energy space. So first of all, we do have CPUC in the room. We do have a representative here that is with us today. And we do, and normally we do have CEC as well, because we work very close with CEC. And for those of you that have done community tours with us, we always, our CEC and PUC, really, we are attached at the hip when it comes to the charging infrastructure, charging reliability conversations. Maybe not en masse in the room today, but maybe thank you for the idea. Maybe next year that's a main topic that we have a main panel session about, and bring our partners into the table for the conversation. So we will definitely do that. But know that they are our partners, and maybe the conversation today isn't entirely focused on that. But we do a lot of work with them across all of our projects, everything from our purchase programs to our mobility projects, because we know you can't, buying the car is one thing, but you've got to get it from point A to point B. You've got to be able to charge it. It needs to be reliable. It needs to be fast. We know, but we also know that we've got a long way to go to make that system really work for everybody and work well. So, but yes, the partners, they are here, and we are working with them. Yep.
Maybe also just a shout out to GoBiz, because the idea of the ZEV Equity Action Plan is actually to ensure that the agencies are coordinating across, both not duplicating efforts, but also not, having these gaps. And so that's end of the year is when that should be completed, right?
That's our goal.
Yeah. I saw a question. Yep.
Hi, Brett Zuner from Foundation for California Community Colleges. I'm reading this book right now called Abundance by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's a leftist kind of perspective on supply side economics, which is unique. And they talk about consumer incentives, and they actually talk about us, the CARB ecosystem, a little bit in it, but maybe not in a good way. Well, positive, but they do mention that demand side policies like consumer incentives may fail if there's not also like a supply side complementary policy. And just thinking about the current tariffs, and we help administer as subs several of these programs, and we're already talking about how do we get people to be able to purchase these cars before they go up? What are we going to do when the inventory goes down? And then we're already seeing the used prices, of all cars starting to creep up. And during the pandemic, we saw that, and it was hugely frustrating, really impacted our programs. It wasn't an issue necessarily of funding or that the programs could run, it was where the cars, and it made it really hard, and they were super expensive. I think that's also why we increased the incentive amount, partially was because of that. When you increase the incentive, it's less people served. So I was wondering, since we have GoBiz here, and of course working with you, Lisa, and CARB, what might we be able to do to support the manufacturing? I know we're doing workforce development like jobs, but thinking about dealerships, and I'm also thinking about the Calibrate campaign. I don't know where that came from, but it's also very effective. I watched it and I almost got, converted. No, I'm just kidding. But it's very effective, and it's obvious what some people are trying to do and attacking Newsom's ZEV goals. So I don't know. I was thinking if we issue these incentives, pay for cars, can those vehicles through these incentives? I know there's already the OEM EJ kind of offsets, right, or something like that for the credits that the OEMs need. But can we boost the credits that they receive towards meeting CARB's requirements, like a 4-to-1, like if for every car that goes through our program offsets these other cars, which would make Calibrate redundant and, it would make their whole point moot. But what can we do to kind of promote the OEM side, especially the global OEMs who we want people to get those cars, but it's going to get very hard. Like Hyundai, Kia, Nissan, they're all starting to sell really well in our programs, and they're going to get hit hard with these tariffs. How do we work with them? I know we try, but it does get difficult sometimes.
It's tough. Yeah, this is a really, really tough nut to crack. And especially, I'm glad you brought it up, especially because of the Calibrate campaign. And so, the first thing I'd say is when it comes to that campaign, the best education that we all can continue to put out that helps to explain to folks not to buy into what the dealers are selling here is really, really important, because it's not just because the governor set a ZEV mandate that this is important. It's important collectively for us as individuals and humans that want to have a healthy future, period. And so trying to help flip that narrative and get folks to understand that there's no scam in going ZEV. Zero-emission vehicles are critical. The pollution that comes from your vehicle that runs on gas impacts you in your neighborhood directly. Every day as you walk down the street, directly. Everybody is impacted by the fumes. Doesn't matter that the car's newer and that they meet cleaner exhaust standards and all of that. Now it's still toxic fumes. And so reminding folks that a zero-emission vehicle driving down the street is not adding to that daily pollution that you're going to be breathing in is really, really important. But getting the automakers to continue to invest in that space, it's hard. We are hearing, and I'll let Gia chime in because she's got a lot more kind of closer connections, I think, here with the industry. But we hear, and I talk with industry all the time, that they're scared. They're very, very nervous. They don't know exactly how these tariffs are going to impact them. Nice to hear that yesterday they were delayed another 90 days. So glad for that next 90 days. But beyond that, I think when it comes to the low income incentive, and I hear you on pricing going up, but used vehicles really are where we know that that's going to benefit in the equity space the most. And yes, we need folks to buy the new for the trickle down to get to the used, absolutely. But we have started to see a pickup in that used market again, which is great. And I guess you could make an argument that in one way the Calibrate campaign helps us is for folks that are ditching their EV, that makes for a better secondary market for the low income consumer. Not that I want that to continue to move, right? But looking at the incentives, making sure that we can tailor them in the right way, and that means maybe adjusting them when we need to, ensuring that we do have a healthy secondary market, because that really is what helps low-income and disadvantaged communities, and then helping to just fight against the misinformation that gets out there about these vehicles, and about how these campaigns and how people drive is, I think, also really important. Yeah. Anything you can add?
I'll just say that I think that that's right. The narrative is a big part of this, that we need to really uplift the stories that maybe aren't as much of the flashy headlines that you're seeing right now. I also think that it's going to be even more important now to think about like public-private partnerships, and I don't necessarily mean that formally. I mean finding and building the coalition of the willing. There are still many out there, whether it's fleets that are saying, hey, we're still transitioning for XYZ, whether it's people that are living in communities that realize the benefits of zero-emission vehicles, and bringing those groups together so we can look at, as an example, we have an economic development plan that was just released last year. It's our first one in 20 years. 13 regions in the state. Some of the regions, on their own, all the regions identified the areas for economic development. Some of them have zero-emission vehicle as that, right? Why are we not working with those local governments and the state and the private sector to figure out where can we build projects and move projects forward, put more investment or awareness campaigns or whatever the tool may be to continue to push forward in areas where we have this coalition of the willing. And so I think it can't just be like, during the Biden-Harris administration, it was like, all the money, just like, get it out there. I don't know, we have to be more strategic now, and that's gonna require us coming together and sometimes sharing uncomfortable information about what we're doing and what we have, and that has always been a challenge. It's so much more important now than ever.
Nice. Question right here from Nydia.
Hi, Nydia Ursig with GoBiz, ZEV Equity Advocate. Happy to be here. My question is to the point you made earlier, Lisa, on the annual funding. How can we work together to get beyond the demo projects, Gillian, that you mentioned? Because a lot of the groups that I'm meeting and talking to are saying to me, we've done the demo and we don't have the continuity, and so now we've lost our funding. Now our program, our project, all the lessons learned, all the learning is at a standstill. So how can we work together? How can we do this coalition of the willing to be able to move that continuity and have like a multi-year grant?
So, well, I'll start from one aspect, which is that we really need to come together. And that is huge. Across my projects, one of our biggest challenges is there is no continuity in funding. And we finally, a couple of years ago, we got very lucky in 2001, coming right out of pandemic and right at the high before the budget went down. The legislature finally got it, and they allocated a 3-year budget to get certain programs going. They put $500,000 into CVRP right off the bat. The next year they came in, they put a big chunk of funding into supporting statewide Clean Cars for All, recognizing that if we continue to do this year by year allocation, we're going to be in these start-stop situations constantly. One of the things that we did to counter that, though, was develop a needs-based approach to how we fund things. And that is to ensure that the funding is there for the most in-need person. And so we have a structure across really starting in our Clean Cars for All statewide program, within our Driving Clean Assistance program, where all folks that come in under the base income threshold of 300% below the federal poverty level, as well as living within a disadvantaged community or within a low-income community, everybody qualifies, meet kind of those basic requirements. But then as the funding starts to go, thresholds are met, and then no longer does everybody under 300%. Now you have to be 225% to participate. And the point is to stretch the dollars. We've got money that should last a certain amount of time, but we want it to last as long as possible and make sure that those gaps don't exist. And we're trying to figure out how to incorporate that across more of our programs so that when we're stuck in this situation of annual budgets, because we're back to that, right? We got really lucky for 2 years, and now we're back to actually either no funding or just little pieces of funding to kind of carry things on, right? So thinking really creatively about how we structure the programs and incorporating needs-based approaches. And we're always open to other ideas to how we can structure needs-based. It's a little different in the mobility space, and that's a conversation that we want to have more of this year, is how do you do that across the car sharing programs, the community type programs that are bridging, whether it's the last mile solution or whether it's an e-bus type solution, whatever it is, how do we bring a needs-based focus in there, or is it possible to do so, right? So, but thinking about the structure of the programs is as important as thinking about what the budget looks like too.
100%.
I'm going to take we've got 7 minutes left. I'm going to take 2 more questions, and then there's going to be a networking time anyway. So if you have more questions for the panelists, please come up, or we'll all grab coffee together. So right here, the woman with the black jacket. I think there's there's a microphone coming.
Hi, Elizabeth Perez, and tribal member from Norfolk Rancheria, Mono Indians, right outside of Yosemite, Southgate, Yosemite, and also owner of Native American Energy Services Company. We're a license A, B, and C. I'm license B, renewable energy developer. We do focus on tribal projects and focus on underserved communities. And what I've seen, and I'll agree with Gia and your point with the Biden administration, there was historic funding, and it was like a fire hose. It wasn't planned and strategically at all. And as much as I say they really meant well, but it didn't work out the way we hoped, especially in Indian country. The tribes that didn't have enough means, enough manpower, just trying to go after everything, and the technical assistance was there was funding, but it wasn't there to actually apply to get the technical assistance. So that's what happened there, and a lot of tribes are trying to grapple from all that. What I want to suggest is for the state to offer, because tribes are mostly in rural communities. We're in the middle of nowhere. Most of us are. And we are slowly buying back our land, like as my tribe is. Native American set-asides. And it's going to benefit California in general because it's in rural communities where a lot of these corridors need to be developed anyway, like in Death Valley. Even when I went out to, most recently 2 weeks ago, the Sequoia National Forest, I had range anxiety, and I didn't like that. I felt very uncomfortable. I'm like, darn it, you know? And I was there because and this is the first tribe in the Central Valley where we developed the medium heavy-duty vehicle EV stations. My team, along with the Tule River tribe, we finally put that there. And that's historic within the Central Valley. We need more of that. Yes. And so the Native American set-asides, and take it a step further, even a set-aside for tribes that don't have those economic means. And I believe in Indian growth. Let's be honest, there are tribes that have a ton of money, and they can go out and have the resources to go after all of those different grants. But then there's tribes like mine and Big Sandy and others and up Northern California, they don't have the means to apply for all those grants. And that's only going to benefit rural parts of California. So I wanted to throw those 2 ideas out there.
That's great, thank you. We're going to take one last question over there, the one there. And in the meantime, panelists, think of 2 sentences each that you want to leave the room with before we take our break.
Hello, Linda Kamushian. I'm with Grid Alternatives, and I just wanted to offer two things. Thank you for your panel and discussion. I appreciate the passion and just thoughtfulness. I want to acknowledge that there are ways that we are going to be affected in California in this sector, obviously, but specifically to this discussion. When you're speaking to a room full of Black, brown, people of color who are at intersections of fear, really, of what's going to happen today, tomorrow, driving while we're in this kind of environment, it's always been bad. Let's just put it that way. But transportation is a risk for us. So the moment we step out of our doors, we are at risk, whether we're taking a bike, we're taking transit, we're driving. And we have to acknowledge that this environment is impacting us in that way. So getting around is not an easy thing for us to do, regardless. So in these, in this ability to transition us to a cleaner transportation system network, how are we accounting for the real impact of that this has on people's lives into these program structures? So the degree of care, and I can point to like how we're doing that within the programs that we implement at Grid, for example, and work with CARB and other agencies, and how we work with people. And the other is that people have tighter budgets, and it's not been great, but it's even worse today. So we can't have the expectations that adoption is going to be happening at the pace that we expect to meet our goals. The cheapest form of transportation is the one you have, and it's not really going to be the case that people want to take on another payment when their car is paid off, for example, And so I just want to acknowledge that there are real impacts. We're not in a bubble in California, and we have a lot of ways that we need to include that into our programming and people's real life experience, and how we can't be that objective anymore when it comes to how we structure these incentive programs, how we structure getting money out the door and who we get it out to. And things like a first come, first serve basis is not the process that works, and we have to move away from making that the first choice when it comes to program design. When we create an equity definition, it has to really be an inclusive idea of bringing together how this is going to impact the actual policies within a program, right? So, and all of the data is so incredible. Like, we already know how to get to the people that we're trying to reach. Why are we recreating this? I really appreciate that comment. To your point, we're not always talking to each other, and we're not always as resourceful as we need to be. So I just want to highlight those things. There's a very palpable experience, and we just all should be stewards of how do we really represent that in the spaces and the positions that we have and the privilege that we have to bring in those real experiences. And when we get that feedback into our programming, and when we bring that to any of your agencies, how to really acknowledge that this is a challenging problem to solve in just one lens. And so I'd love to hear, in the 1 minute that's left, if you have a thought on that, or just take that with you and we can continue to discuss throughout the day.
So if I can, it's an incredible point, and you're absolutely right. This is why California is so awesome, right? California, so here's a couple of things to, I hope, give you hope. One is, about 10 years ago now, California said, why do you have to be a United States citizen to have a driver's license? That's nuts, right? So we were basically preventing millions of Californians from buying car insurance, which they could afford, because we required you to be a US citizen in order to get your driver's license, right? So about 10 years ago, California took the leap and decoupled those things. So you can have a driver's license or a state ID in California without having a social security number, right? We don't care. And millions of people, as soon as we did that, came into the light and got driver's licenses. They took the issue that you're talking about, and they took a leap of faith and got California driver's licenses. And one reason that we did that, and it was successful, is that California guaranteed that the way that we did it was privacy first, and that our databases will not be accessible for instance, the current administration. And that is true. One of the first things that the Trump administration did last time was raid all of the state DMV databases for exactly this kind of information, and they're trying to do it now with the IRS. They couldn't get Californians. They couldn't get Californians, and they still can't. It's technically very difficult, and we also got in the way politically. And that goes into the design of the kind of thing that we did with the driver's license, which is why the DMV is such an important partner. And for my sake, for where I'm coming from, that's exactly the kind of privacy by design work that we're going to do, right? You shouldn't have to know. Why is when I first started this work in San Francisco, SFMTA and Muni in San Francisco used to collect copies of people's income tax returns to prove that they were low income so they could get their low income discounts. And they would store people's income tax returns. Every transit agency in California is currently taking photocopies of people's driver's licenses to prove that they're seniors. That's not necessary. And that's exactly why we need to be bringing it at the state level and having these conversations and listening to, like, your comment needs to be banged into our heads at every juncture. But for my part, I can tell you that that's exactly the kind of work that I'm doing, is like we're over asking information from people, which is bad business, but it's also invasive and scary. And we're California. This is the way we do it, man.
I failed at my job at keeping everybody on time. So but for a really great reason. Thank you to the comments from the floor, to my panelists. Maybe 2 sentences from each of you, and then I'll send you all off for coffee, and we can continue the conversation in person. Lisa.
Yeah, all I want to, mine is really just one, which is we need to continue to work together to tackle all of the incredible problems that we have. Thank you.
Gia.
Well, I know that in these chaotic times, it can be really sometimes difficult to find a path forward. So just remembering that a lot is still happening and to advance our vision together. And I think community, however we define it, is an antidote to our kind of climate and social justice anxiety that we're feeling more than ever now. And also, optimism is a strategy, so we can use that.
Love that. Gillian?
I already said too much, so I'm just going to say let's everybody keep doing our work. Just go to work. We know what to do.
Thank you to my panelists.